1814. And if you notice, interesting to note that there's not enough stars in there. They weren't added till later. You know, so it was actually, the battle was fought under a flag where the statehood of Louisiana hadn't been recognized as yet. This also, before I start, I'd also like to dedicate this to Christina. She was an amazing woman and a great historian and a dear friend. So anyway, going into this, this is the painting by Hyacinth La Collette, and he was an engineer for Jackson, did a lot of sketches during the battle, and he pulled them all together and did this watercolor. And if you look at it, you can see a lot that's going on here. Here you have Lion Jackson. Here you have the British. We'll be talking about another number of elements. You notice most of the concentrations of the British are up here along the edge of the woods. That's Gibbs's attack. That's the main attack. Here you see a little battle here. That's the forward redoubt. We'll get in more discussion with that. That's where Colonel René attacked. These are his troops running along the Batcher, and they're protected from fire from this direction by the levee as they come in this direction. This is the McCarty House. That was Jackson's headquarters. And if you look over here, there's some ruins. That's the Chalmette House. Jackson blew that up and burned it to the ground on the 28th of December so the British couldn't use it for cover. Pointe de Chalmette was about 60 years old at the time, witnessed it, fought in the lines. After the battle was over, came out to his house, picked through the ruins with the bodies of the British soldiers that were shallowly buried, popping up. You can only imagine the stench. Depressed because there was no FEMA back at that time. So he was forced then to go home. He went to his house. He had another apartment on Conti Street, climbed in bed, and soon after died of depression. And he left no heirs. You don't see here is across the river here is Patterson's battery, which is shooting across the field. So the British find themselves in a crossfire, all right, if you look at the situation. So we move on. There's a number of myths about the Battle of New Orleans that you have to address. The first one is that the Battle of New Orleans was one battle fought on one day. We always talk about January 8th, and obviously that was a very consequential day, but there was a lot more. It was actually a major campaign on the part of the British along the entire Gulf Coast, and we'll get into those details. The war was over, so the campaign for New Orleans had no meaning. Now, the battles began before the Treaty of Ghent was initialed. Then on December 24th, which is the day before one of the conflicts with the British here in Chalmette, the Treaty of Ghent was signed by the negotiators in Ghent. It's not ratified. It doesn't become a treaty by law until it's ratified. That means signed by the king, signed by the president, passed by the Senate, and exchanged. Both sides get copies. That doesn't take place till February 17th. So all was on, if you read the treaty, all is on until ratification. So whatever happens before ratification is subject to renegotiation. So the situation with Louisiana and New Orleans was hanging in the air with the Battle of New Orleans. Had the British won, everything would have returned according to the Treaty of Ghent? Not necessarily. There's some vagueness in the way the Treaty of Ghent's written, which leaves the door open. As I said, it hadn't been ratified, and we'll talk about it later, that the Earl of Bathurst had given a letter to Pakenham before he left, suggesting to him that if the Spanish and French residents in the city decide to take over the city and go back to Spain, do what you can to see that it happens. So the Battle of New Orleans had a lot to do with determining the future of the Louisiana Purchase, because the British never really accepted, as I can't remember exactly the quote, how they put it, the Napoleon's construction of the world. And the idea was that Napoleon had taken Louisiana from Spain under the Treaty of Ildefonso, but never lived up to the treaty. He never paid for it, actually. So Louisiana was stolen property that we bought, and the British basically felt like it should go back to Spain. And the Battle of New Orleans had little impact in the future history of the United States. Consider if we lost the Louisiana Purchase. You know, you got to look at Western expansion, you know, Civil War, World War I, World War II. We wouldn't have been a continental power. That we, you know, so that you start looking at the implications, the what-ifs, which is really not the role of history, but nevertheless your mind strays in that direction. You realize the implications of losing the Louisiana Purchase should that have happened. Just to give you an idea of what would have happened. You know, that's a significant piece of ground, and it had all been gone. Especially the port of New Orleans and control over the Mississippi River. So, I have to move this in a little bit so I can see the letter. So this is the letter from the Earl of Bathurst to Pakenham, where to my instructions to Major General Ross. General Ross was supposed to be the commander in charge of the invasion of New Orleans, but he was killed by a sniper at Baltimore. So Pakenham was kind of a last-minute fill-in, and that's why he's late arriving at the battle scene, because he's in London when this transpires, and he's got to sail across the Atlantic to meet his army, supposedly in Jamaica, but they'd already left. So if you look at the battle, these are how many battles you have. It's not one battle. You have the Creek Indian Wars, which have been raging for a while, and the British then, after the United States declares war against Great Britain, starts aggressively supplying the Indians with all the supplies they need to continue that war. The attack on Fort Boyer, Battle of Pensacola, Battle of Lake Borgne, Night Battle of the 23rd, Assault of the 28th, Assault of January 1st, the Assault of the 8th in the West Bank occupation, that's the major battle, and Cochrane's attacks on the force, and his final, the British actually, the very last battle, succeed in taking Fort Boyer, where this whole thing began. So it's a campaign, it's not one battle. Britain accused of providing Indians and the frontier with arms and supplies. They're doing that as early as April of 1814. They have records, if you read the Admiralty records, which they actually have at the Williams Research Center, you see them giving supplies and information and uniforms, whatever they can, to the Native Americans, and also trying to incite slave rebellions if they possibly can. Tecumseh, before the war, had traveled down because he was fighting against the Americans. This was a traditional Native American European settler struggle, and he was able to divide the tribe, the Creeks, into what's called the red sticks. They actually painted their tomahawk handles red, and they had divided themselves, and they were attacking the settlers and killing the settlers. That opened the Creek War in the southeast, and after war was declared, as I said, the British started aggressively supplying the Native Americans, and they were operating through Apalachicola and Pensacola. Not as ties to the Napoleonic Wars, in a way, because with Napoleon fighting and the wars taking place there, the British now realized that Spain was becoming an ally. Remember the Peninsula War, because Spain was under control of France. Once France and Napoleon is defeated, Spain becomes an ally. They start using Spanish Florida as an ally, as a means of supplying the natives against the Americans. Then you have the Fort Sims massacre. It's pretty involved. I won't get into all the details, but if you imagine Andrew Jackson's laying in bed with a bullet in his shoulder from a duel from Mr. Dickerson, when this massacre takes place, he hears about it, he leaps out of bed, organizes his Kentucky militia and Tennessee militia, and starts moving in against the Creek Indians. This is the Fort Mims massacre. He had 517 killed, wounded, and captured, most of them scalped. Children's heads were beat against the sides of the wall of this fort. This totally outrages Jackson, as I said, so he begins the Creek Indian Wars, his side of it, and these are the different battles that take place. There's Fort Mims down here. The important thing about this is, which is interesting, Jackson's always hammered, and somewhat rightfully so, for the Trail of Tears, but in one of these battles, when it's over with, there's a young child there, a baby, and he turns, picks the baby up and hands it to an Indian woman and says to take care of it. And she says, no, the mother's dead, let the baby die too. He takes the baby, sends it to his wife, and raises it as his own child. Child dies at the age of 12 of tuberculosis. So it's an interesting story. He's a very complicated man, okay? So after Fort Mims, he's now reduced the Indian threat. So he's got to go on. Did this thing work? Going back here, I'm sorry. But this is, I'm highlighting here, this is Mobile. And this is the operation, this is where the British are operating from. The Americans have Mobile. The Gulf Campaign, Napoleon abdicates on April 11th, 1814. He's defeated. Remember, people, you know your history. He gets captured, he surrenders, he's forced on the island of Elba, and he escapes Elba, I think it's 100 days later, and begins another campaign where he's finally defeated at Waterloo, and then they send him off the coast of Africa to St. Helena. But in the meantime, he abdicates, they force his abdication. The British now have this massive war machine that they've used against Napoleon. They're at war with America. This is their opportunity to turn the massive might of what they have solely against an unprepared America. The Amnesty opens fire in an offensive. First they take Washington, the Battle of Bladensburg. The Americans fight somewhat sporadically and retreat. The British take the city of Washington, D.C., literally go into the White House, have the warm dinner that Madison was eating, and then burn the White House, other public buildings. You have the story of Dolly Madison running out, taking the documents out of President. It's that type of a crisis. From there, they go to Baltimore, Fort McHenry. I think we already discussed that. The Star Spangled Banner was written at that point. We all know the story there, but it's at Baltimore. It's not only a naval attack, it's a land attack. And the land attack was led by General Ross, who's shot by an American sniper. As I mentioned, he's the guy that's supposed to lead the attack on Chalmette. He's a seasoned combat veteran. Pakenham is more a staff officer. Then they turn to the Gulf of Mexico and is placed under Admiral Cochrane, who's given complete command at this point of all the maritime forces, and the Gulf expedition begins with New Orleans being the target. Spain, as I said, has now become an ally with the abdication of Napoleon, so the British turn to Spain and literally have British flags flying under the Spanish flags in the forts outside Pensacola. This is Napoleon's abdication. He's still bold. Look how big he writes his name. He's like John Hancock, right? Can't beat that ego. And this is an interesting thing. This is a painting by David showing Napoleon crossing the Alps on a white stallion, which you see the winds of fortune at his back. You know, this is propaganda because he crossed on the back of a jackass, but hey, let's not let facts get in the way. And of course, the British recognize that, so when they did their cartoon, they had him on the back of the jackass, facing back with a broken sword. So that's why him going off to Elba. So they got him out the way, they think, permanently, but they're wrong about that. So it's now time to deal with the Gulf campaign. This is the area we're dealing with. It's not just Chalmette in New Orleans. It's this entire area. And remember too, something I want to add, we talk about the Battle of New Orleans. So yeah, but it took place at St. Bernard Parish. At that time, the boundary of New Orleans was such that it took place in New Orleans. Okay? That doesn't change, I think, till 1817. So anyway, this is the area. That's Fort Boyer. Jackson built that up and armed it to protect it because the British were here at Pensacola and he wanted to protect the city of Mobile. Here you see the date, 1764. What's that all about? After the French and Indian War, England took over Florida. So this area here is called West Florida, the Mississippi River, and you see all those waterways. This whole area was British colony. There weren't 13 colonies in the American Revolution, there were 14. I don't count this one, but this is a British colony. You know, it goes back to 1764 and they lose it, you know, and in 1783. So for 20 years. So the British come here. This is an area that had once been populated by loyal British because British loyalists were moving in here during the American Revolution. So there's every reason to think they might have some support. This here is Fort Boyer again. The initial plan the British had, this is early in September, was to take Fort Boyer, and it was supposed to, it wasn't a very well-built fort, it was just, you know, kind of haphazardly put together. Take Mobile, and remember, they have an army of 14,500, it's estimated, in mass, march across, which was a British colony, cut off the Mississippi River at Manchac, or thereabouts, and then float down. So they blockade the Mississippi, so no supplies, float down the Mississippi and take the city of New Orleans. It's a brilliant plan. And as early as September, Jackson's up here fighting Indians, okay? What happens is this, you have Captain William Percy, and if you read the records, it's really kind of interesting, because he writes a letter to Admiral Cochrane saying, look, this is going to be a cakewalk, they got this little fort at Fort Boyer, it's really not well armed, not well manned, certainly the men aren't trained. I'm going to take a fleet of just 4 ships, take some Marines and Indians, and we'll hit a two-front attack. We'll hit them with the Navy up the front here, bombard them with broadsides. We'll land a landing group here of Marines and Indians. They'll sweep in from this side. We'll knock them out. We'll gain access to Mobile. Of course, it doesn't work because they land the Marines here as they come forward. The Americans have, if you look outside, you have grape-shot examples of that. Attack these guys. A number of the British get killed. It stymies their attack. The Indians say, I want no part of this. They run away, so the land invasion stops. The HMS Hermes down here, which is Percy's ship, they come up and they start loading bombs, broadsides against the fort. His ship runs aground, bow forward. You can't bring your guns to bear when you bow forward. So at Fort Boyer, the commanders there start peppering his ship. He works strenuously to break it free. He does. It swings around stern forward to the ship forward. Same thing, can't bring his guns to bear. He gets torn up. He calls to the Seahorse and asks them to evacuate him and the surviving members of his crew. His ship then drifts down eventually as it comes off the tide and blows up. So you got this great letter where he's writing to Cochrane basically saying, you know that planned attack I was saying that was be a cakewalk? We lost and I lost my ship. He gets court-martialed and never serves as a captain again. But needless to say, Cochrane's upset about this. After that, Jackson's furious. So he then decides this deal with the Spanish and the English, excuse me, in Pensacola has to be dealt with. He's got 3,500 men. He heads towards Pensacola, sends some guys under a white flag to talk to the Manrique, who's the governor, the Spanish governor. They shoot at him. He becomes furious. He decides to take Spanish soldiers. He's captured under white flags. He doesn't care if they get shot at and killed. Then he decides, oh, to hell with it anyway, I'm going to invade. So he invades Pensacola. The Spanish governor doesn't exactly know what to do. The English, who don't have enough men to support themselves, they withdraw, they blow up the forts and leave. So Jackson has now conquered Pensacola. He's invaded Spain, in essence, you know. That's Andrew Jackson. But by doing that, he's depriving the British of a land base to supply their troops, their invasion troops. They're now stuck on ships and whatever supplies they have on their ships. So here you have the situation of the southeast Louisiana, and this is the Gulf Coast here, and these are the islands we all know, the Chandelier Islands, which were a lot more, populated and vegetated than they are now. So this is one of the maps from the British at the time. So what happens is the Brits leave Pensacola and they start sailing along the outside of the islands, because we all know how shallow that is. Patterson has 5 gunboats. They're on the inside and they're tracking them. So you have this little blue line. So you have this cat and mouse game. As the British then start amassing their fleet, they have close to 100 ships. A lot of them are empty cargo ships, because Cochrane's goal is to empty all the warehouses in New Orleans, because they had blockaded the city, and that would be prize money for him, his men, his officers, and the king. And he also has administrators to run the government. They're serious about running Louisiana in the city of New Orleans, okay? So that's the operation up here. What happens is they got to dislodge the gunboats, so the British decide the only way they can do it, they can't bring these ships in, is they have these barges they'd use to transport their men for the invasion. They mount a carronade on the front of each barge. They put 43 barges and they come against the 5 gunboats. The interesting thing here is that the typical British, they take one gunboat, put a carronade on it, and practice the routine of how to do it. Once they figured out how to do it, then they got to train the other 43 gun crews. It takes 2 weeks. When you look at the timeline, time is of the essence. Jackson gets something like 2,500 reinforcements 2 days before the 8th battle. These delays play to Jackson's help, because even though he may lose this battle, the delay allows reinforcements and supplies to start coming in. This is a painting of the battle. These ships that they have here are significantly larger than the real thing, because that's what a real gunboat looked like. They're only 50 feet long. You know, Thomas Jefferson didn't believe in a navy per se, he believed in a defensive force. And small gunboats would satisfy protecting the coast. Okay, this is a model of one. And you can see, the main gun is a bow chaser. These guns on the sides are relatively small, so it's really not that effective as a defensive weapon turned broadside. Now Jackson's facing this situation. This is where we are. And I want you to look at this map carefully. These are all the plantations down the Gulf Coast here. This is line Jackson, down in Chalmette. This is line Jackson, this is line Dupleix, this is line Montreal. He has 3 lines where Jackson will fight here. If defeated, fall back. If defeated, fall back. If defeated, fight in the city. And he would probably burn the city down. I mean, Czar burned down Moscow. He had no great attraction to New Orleans. He wouldn't allow it to become effectively in British hands. That was the concern. Here's the West Bank. Here's John Jackson. I said this is the battery on the opposite side by Patterson. There's several lines of defense here. The main line is Beaujeu. If the British are able on the West Bank to get past here and get Algiers Point, they can launch attacks into the city. This is the threat. This is the problem. That's why the West Bank is so important. This little insert here shows Jackson's problem. He knows the Brits have taken Lake Bon, but he doesn't know from whence they're going to come. Are they going to come through the marshes? Are they going to come here? This is here, the Chef Pass, as they see, down this way and hit the Gulf, the river. I'm sorry, I'm gonna get it straight here. It's an old Spanish fort in Lake Pontchartrain. This is when they, after talking to Jean Lafitte, are they gonna come up through the waterways? That's why he orders all waterways to be blocked. Or, you don't have it here, are they gonna go completely across the lake, hit the river, and float down on the city? Jackson's problem is, he knows they're there, but he doesn't know from whence they're gonna come. So he's got what forces he has at this time dispersed everywhere is his eyes, trying to find out what the British are gonna do and when they're going to do it. This is what they're gonna do. They have agents. Out here, you have a fisherman's village at the head of Lake Bourne and Bayou Bienvenu. It was called Bayou Catalan back then. And these guys are in cahoots with the British. They show the British the way in. They come down here to the Villeray plantation. When they get here, Villeray has left this canal open in violation of Jackson's direct order. But he sent men down to make sure that nothing happening there. They fall asleep. They're not watching. So when the British show up, they capture these guys. But they don't know, the Brits not sure if they trust what's going on, so they send a Lieutenant Piddle, dressed up as a trapper in a pirogue, to come all the way up to make sure what they've been told is true. He goes all the way up past the Villeray plantation late at night, sneaks past, kneels down in the river, takes a drink of water with his hand, looks up the river and says, yeah, we're here. He then goes back and reports to Keane, General Keane, and to Thornton. I love this guy, Thornton. He's a colonel. The way is clear. They then begin taking their men and worsening their men. The problem is they don't have enough barges for all the men, so they have to come in detail. So it's about 1,600 men at a time. So the first 1,600 come up behind the Villeray plantation. He allows them to rest until the next morning. Next morning they invade. They rush past. And the image you have is Gabriel Villeray, who's a member of the militia, a major, is sitting in front of his house, supposedly drinking a cup of coffee. His brother's leaning against the rail, cleaning a pistol, and all of a sudden British soldiers come running past the sides of him. What possessed him to do it, God only knows. But Gabriel jumps up, runs into his house, and thinks he's going to escape out the back door, which is from whence the British came. He opens up the door, and Thornton's standing there with a sword saying, "You're now my prisoner." He takes him prison. The British now take over the Villeray plantation and make it a headquarters. Thornton turns to Keane and says, "Let's go. Let's take the city. They don't even know we're here." And Keane looks at him and says, "You're crazy." And he is kind of. He's kind of like, he's like the Navy SEAL. He's got one image on his mind. He's in the wind, He says no, because if it fails, it's going to be my fault because I'm commander. Pakenham's nowhere around yet, so we're just going to get all our troops. This might have been an opportunity for the British to win that they lost. So anyway, they're amassing their troops. Gabriel Villeray escapes. He jumps through a window, hides out in the woods. British can't find him. Goes upstream to the Rodelaron plantation, goes up to the river, takes a pirogue across to the Delacroix plantation, borrows horses, rides upstream, catches is actually a ferry at Canal Street, goes across and goes to the French Quarter, Royal Street, to Jackson's headquarters, where he informs Jackson what's happened. That's Jackson's headquarters for Lossing's book. Because actually, if you read that Signs of Piano Store, I don't know if that was before or after, because the book was done in the 1860s, but that was the headquarters. It's about where the courts are now, where the appeals court is. He arrives, but at the same time, Arsène de la Tour, Jackson's engineer, is curious. He goes down the river to see what's going on, and as he approaches St. Bernard, he sees people coming up the river, asks him what's going on. He said, the British are at the Villeray plantation. He goes down, looks at it himself, and finds that he does a head count. He's pretty accurate. He says about 1,500 Brits. He comes back up, and he reports to Jackson what's happened, where the British are. It's soon after that that horse prints are heard outside. Villeray runs in, and an excited French starts trying to tell Jackson what's going on, and Jackson's looking at this Frenchman saying, "I don't speak French. Somebody tell me what this man's saying." When he finds out, he now has confirmation where the British are, but then he immediately turns to Villeray and says, "How did they get there?" He said, "They came up by UB Avenue. I ordered all waterways blocked. Arrest this man." He will be placed under arrest. Court-martialed, but it won't go through because after all, this is New Orleans and Louisiana. Let's be honest. First Creole governor's son is not going to jail. So Jackson's strength is that he says, "I'll now allow the British to sleep one night." So what he does is he turns to his navy and he has the Carolina, which is a ship, float downstream opposite the Villeray plantation, and informs them, "Do not say a word. I don't care what happens. Say nothing." Okay? At 7:30, open the gun ports and give them everything you got. Meantime, he gets Delarant, the Beatles rifleman, and another assault with the soldiers. He tells you guys, swing to the outside and along the edges of the cypress swamp and be prepared to hit the British. He himself, with some Marines and soldiers and other elements, comes along the river road here with a cannon to attack. The idea is they're going to position themselves, wait for the Carolina to open fire. After about 15 minutes of that, they'll open their attack. The Brits, for their part, think everything's cool. They're camping, they're getting their fires going. It's cold, it's the mini ice age. Climate change is nothing new, okay? They're freezing out here. They're building fires, they're washing their clothes, they're fixing a hot meal, they're trying to rest because they know what's coming. But this is to be a cakewalk. This is to be like Washington, D.C. All of a sudden, they're on the levee. They see the ship. They're waving at the ship, trying to get its attention, yelling at it. Some guy shot fire a musket shot, see if they get some response. Nothing happens until 7:30. Then all of a sudden they hear a command, give them hell, all the gates opened up, and the gunpowder comes flying out, and grape shot comes flying out. The soldiers are getting riddled with grape shot. Panic breaks out in the British camp. They're hiding under the levee, protection of the levee, and after a number of minutes of this, suddenly they hear fighting upriver, and that's Jackson and Delarant attacking their lines. This is the night attack. British don't fight at night. That's not according to the rules. And that's what they're about to discover. America is three Americas at this time. They're used to New England America, you know, the brass buckles and three-cornered hats, or they're used to the Southern America, the plantation owners. They're not used to Duck Dynasty out here in the West. I mean, think about it. These are guys, Americans are guys that couldn't get along with people in Europe, so they came to America. These are guys that couldn't get along with the people that left, so they went out to the West. They're fiercely independent. And these are the guys they're running across. These are Indian fighters, okay? Brits aren't used to that. They're used to maybe country clerks or something like that. This is a totally new breed of American out here. And that's what they're going to be facing. So what happens is they attack them at night. The Brits are like, nobody fights at night. You know, and Americans are like, oh yeah, Indians do it, so do we. So they attack them at night. It's about an hour and a half. Now remember the weather. You all have been out on the 1st, right? Shoot your firecrackers and all that stuff. How it gets so foggy you can't see anything. A, because of the fog. B, because of the black powder. That's what happens. It's so dark and so foggy, they can't see anything. Beale's riflemen capture a bunch of Brits and bring them to their camp. Only they got turned around and walked into the British camp. It's like, well, this didn't work. No, it didn't. You know, guys are yelling at each other, trying to find out whose side they're on. So after about an hour and a half, Jackson pulls back. The Brits call it a victory. Jackson says, no, I don't think so. He pulls back and he sees this ditch, the Rodrigue Canal. He says, you know, that's a geographic point. That makes a great defensive line. So he starts digging it out and makes that his defensive line. So from the British point of view, the Americans withdrew. From the American point of view, he wields together a weird collection of Choctaw Indians, free people of color, slaves, Frenchmen, Islanos, Spanish, businessmen, you name it, Tennesseans, Kentuckians, and welded them into an army basically in one battle. They're like the Saints. You know, coming back at halftime having scored. I mean, they're high-fiving in the locker room because they're saying, man, we did this. And did you see Andy? He wasn't leading from behind. Andy Jackson was in front, waving his saber with bullets flying past his head. He don't care. Well, Jackson personally hated the British from the American Revolution. It made him an orphan. His two brothers died. His mother died as a nurse. He was rendered an orphan by the British. There's a whole story I wish I had time to get into. He had a personal animosity for them. So this was personal and geopolitical. So anyway, that's the battle of the 23rd, the night battle. Oops, go back ahead. So here's the arrangement. Here you have Lyon Jackson. Here you have the battery, Patterson's battery, and the British are over here at the Delarant plantation. Here's the plantation house. If you see here, here's the burned house on the 28th. Here's the cypress swamp. It's not one battle. You have the battle of the 25th. Pakenham doesn't arrive till the 25th. He's afraid that when he arrives, Cochrane is going to be in New Orleans and he's going to be serving him dinner. When he arrives, he sees his troops where they are, and he's taken aback. He turns to a soldier. He says, why have you not advanced? He says, bullets. Damn bullets. And the guy walks off. These are guys who fought Napoleon in the Peninsula Campaign. They're stymied. They can't believe this. And then Pakenham looks around and says, my God, what idiot put me here? I got a river on one side, a swamp on the other, and a defensive line in front. I'm in a box. Of course, an admiral puts you there. The guy knows nothing about land warfare. So, but he's stuck with the reality of the situation. On December 28th, he has what's called a reconnaissance in force. He takes his troops, he breaks his cannon. Now remember, everything's got to be brought by boat 80 miles from Ship Island. He brings his cannons, set his cannons up, and the idea is, I'm going to hit the American lines. I don't know how strong they are. I'm going to hit them and find out. If they're weak, I'm going to keep going forward and take it. If they're too strong, it'll be a probing operation. I can learn what their strengths are. So he does that. He runs out of ammunition because he doesn't have sufficient amount of ammunition for his cannons. He's not going anywhere, so he pulls back. This is the second lost opportunity, because when he meets his officers, Gibbs says, why'd you pull back? He says, we weren't getting anywhere. He says, maybe you weren't, but I was. I went through the cypress swamp. I was this close to being behind Jackson's lines. If you get behind the lines, you cause chaos. Of course, Jackson's told the same thing by Coffee, his guy, so he extends the line deeper into the swamp and puts a dog leg toward the city, so you got to go real wide to get behind his line. That's that one. January 1st, the British now line themselves up for another attack. The Americans, that's Louisiana, right? We're dancing and partying in the lines. It's the first. It's foggy. Had the British just snuck up, they might have been able to take the position. But they fight European warfare. They sit back and they wait until the sun comes up and the clouds drift away, and then they attack. Chaos breaks out in Jackson's line because they weren't expecting it. We're attacks on them first. We're partying and drinking. What is this? It takes them 15 minutes to get reorganized, but finally they're able to do it, and they're able to suppress the British. Okay? Another thing that happens is the British have brought up a lot of guns, a lot of cannons. Their problem is they're using naval cannons from the fleet. They don't work well on soft, wet ground. And additionally, from the records I've heard, they've tried to find a way of protecting the gunners. They didn't have anything much, but they thought that casks of sugar would be fine because it's like sand. I don't know if you all have ever dealt with simple syrup, but if you can imagine trying to man a gun when all of a sudden you're covered with wet sugar and you got to try. So it was really chaotic on the part of the British, and every time they fired one of these guns, it kind of sunk in the mud, so accuracy was very difficult. Where on the other side, Jackson by this time has the Baratarians helping him. They've got land-based howitzers, well-based. They can point and shoot. They're knocking out the British guns. This is a failure. Then finally we come to January 8th. This is the big battle. Pakenham backs up. He says, I got to come up with another plan. Okay? So what he does is, after the 2 attempts, he has to come up with his new plan, and he decides that he's going to have a 2-front attack. He's going to take the East Bank and the West Bank simultaneously. Okay? And that way he can overcome Jackson. So he turns to Thornton. I love Thornton. And he says, Colonel, come here. You're crazy. I know that. And that's what I want right now. I want you to take 1,400 men, cross the Mississippi River. You work your way up there. That damn battery on the West Bank's giving me hell, because it's giving me a crossfire. You take that battery out in the early morning hours. I'll have my men lined up here in Chalmette, in the fog, in the dark. When I hear the sound of your guns taking that battery, that's a signal on my side to move forward, because I don't have to worry about that battery. Either A, you take it, you put it out of action, or B, it's going to turn its guns down the river to protect itself, which effectively takes it out of action from my perspective. Okay? That's your job. Colonel Renee, I don't know if I have them all up yet. I want you to go up to Batchin. You'll be protected by the levee, and Patterson's guns will be now nullified. You take that forward redoubt. The forward redoubt's in areas of a little ratio, so to speak, with cannons. Jackson didn't want it. His officers wanted it. Said, well, because if the British hit our lines, we can shoot down the line together. He says, yeah, but if the British take that position, because it's forward on the line, they can turn those guns against me, because they only had wooden planks connecting the two. Jackson did it. Pakenham sees the value. So he says, I want Renee to take that and turn those guns. Keene, I want you to attack along the levee, on the marsh side, so to speak. Reinforce Renee if he succeeds. If he doesn't, you're in a position then to turn around and reinforce Gibbs. Gibbs, looking over Jackson's line, I've noticed that this area close to the forest there, the cypress swamp, is relatively weak. That's my point. That's where we're going to hit. Governors, son, I want you to come over here, and we're going to have ladders and fascines. Ladders are just ladders, fascines are bundles of sugar cane. Your men, the 44th, take these, get ahead of Gibbs' attack. Jackson has built the deep ditch. It's not what you see out there now. If you go into the auditorium, you'll see what it really looks like in the diorama. You take the fascines and you throw it in the ditch and you fill it up. You take the ladders, you lay it over the top. You step out the way, you did your job. Gibbs's men can then charge up over those ladders and just take that force, a force of arms. They can blow a hole right through Jackson's defense there. Once we've got that, we're on the inside of his perimeter. He's ours. Gentlemen, this is going to work. Okay? So that's the plan. Problems are. What happens is, Cochrane has the boats. Pakenham needs boats to cross the river. Pakenham's idea is to take the boats, roll them on logs like he did his cannon, throw them in the river. Admiral says, no, we're doing it the Navy way. We're going to dig out the Villeray Canal to the river. We're going to float the boats in. We're going to build the dam behind them. We're going to open up the levee, let the water float in, and then we'll paddle the boats across. Pakenham's not too happy with this, but there's not a whole lot he can do. Fine, go to it. He then goes to bed. He expects Thornton to be gone at about 12 o'clock at night, maybe 1. He sleeps till about 2 or 3. He wakes up, and who's he running into? Thornton. What the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to be on the other side. Well, maybe you ought to come see this. So they go down there and they find out that everything worked somewhat according to plan. They dug the canal out, they brought the boats in, they built the levee, the boats are there, they break the levee, the water flows in, the boats float just like they're supposed to, the levee in the back breaks, the water flows out, the boats sink in the mud. Pakenham's furious. So he says, how many boats can I get out of here? So they struggle to get what they can. Thornton now has 600 instead of 1,400 men. To compound matters, it's very foggy and cold. So he tells Thornton to go across. Now at this point it's interesting, because Keane turns to Pakenham and says, why not wait a day? This whole thing is based on coordination and time, and that's kind of shot right now. Another day is not going to make a change significantly. And Pakenham says, my orders will await no longer. He signals Thornton to cross. You got this image, mental image of your mind of him pushing out in the fog and disappearing in the fog, and Pakenham saying, great, thinking he's across the river. Nobody, that's where the book comes in, nobody thought to throw a piece of wood in the river to see if there's a current. How can you not do that? So poor Thornton gets caught in the current, and he's rowing not only across the river, but against the current. He's getting pushed down the river. Pakenham don't know this. He goes back to his lines, and he lines everybody up for their attack, which is this. So he's waiting for the sound of the guns across the river. Doesn't hear them. So he's waiting, and he's waiting. It's got to be any time now. I know Thornton, he's an aggressive. Thornton's still in the middle of the damn river. Finally, what happens is the fog lifts enough, and Spott's battery, the American side, sees these Brits lined up. He opens up a shot into the British lines. It's now game on. Pakenham fires 2 Congreve rockets, which is a signal for the opening of the attack, and the attack takes place, but Patterson's battery is alive and well. When the first shots are fired, Thornton finally hits the west bank about 1.5 miles further down than where he's supposed to be. So he's out of the action initially, okay? So the battle takes place. Rene comes up here, takes the forward redoubt, raises his saber, says the day is ours, at which point he gets shot, falls off, most of his officers are shot. These guys are getting hammered from Patterson's battery, they start retreating. Keane starts advancing in this direction. He sees this isn't going anywhere. Gibbs forms an attack on this point, this weak point. Trouble is, it's not weak anymore, because 2 days before, Jackson got 2,500 Tennesseans in Kentucky and said, you know, I got a weak point in my line. This might be a good place to put him. He puts them in ranks of 4. So one shoots, step back, next the British refer to it as rolling thunder. It's like a machine gun almost. And that's what these guys are suddenly facing. It wasn't there before. It is there now. Plus, you know, the cannons, if you read the accounts, it's incredibly brutal. His problem is, where's the 44th? There's nowhere to be around with the ladders and fascines. Why? Gubbins is a young officer whose daddy bought him a position. His wife is in the fleet. He promised her Christmas dinner in New Orleans. When he's given this order, one of his younger officers turns to him and says, what did you find out at the meeting? He says, we've been ordered to suicide. He says, well, he says, we got to run, approach the American lines holding sugarcane over our head, or maybe a ladder. They're going to kill us. And Pakenham was told, maybe you shouldn't get the 44th to do it. They're not a storming party. They've never done this before. And Pakenham said he'll do his duty. Wrong. What happens is there's two forward readouts. He's told all the ladders and fastenings of the forward readout. In the dark, he goes to the ones where they're not. And you have this image of, well, I guess they're not here. I don't know. He wasn't anxious to find them. So he's nowhere to be seen. So Gibbs's men get torn up, and they retreat to a break in the woods. And he signals to Pakenham, I got a problem, where's the 44th? Meantime, Keane is coming across. We have the 96 Hollanders. And Thomas Dale was with them. He's one of the commanders. And supposedly that morning, the medical officer came up to Dale and said, well, how do you think things are going to go today? And Dale opened up his coat, takes out a letter, hands it to him, takes his watch off his watch band and hands it to the doctor. He says, give these to my wife, today I die. And he does. In crossing, he's killed after he issues the advance order, halt, and they halt. 300 of them are shot because the Cardinal British, when you're told to halt, you halt, and that's it. They stay there till they're ordered to withdraw. So they're being peppered, but that's military discipline. Finally, Pakenham advances himself to find out the problem with the 44th. That's when he gets killed. First time he's shot in the arm, and his horse is shot out from underneath him. His aide-de-camp puts him on his own Creole pony, leading him to the battle. Pakenham is going forward, and what's sad about that is when Pakenham left London, a friend said, Edward, please be careful. It's not worth dying over. And he said, well, you know, I will. But should the occasion arise where I have to advance to the front to rally my troops, I'll do what duty calls. And that's exactly how he dies. Second time he gets hit with grape shot, all he does is moan. And that's it. He's down in the ground. Pakenham is dead. Elements of the 44th, all found by Gibbs. He tries his advance. Gibbs is killed. And the second invasion attempt is wiped out. The whole army then retreats. I think this is them attacking. This is Dale's group coming across. This is the retreat. Lambert is in charge at the bottom here of the reserves. He's watching this unfold, and it's unbelievable. He can't believe what's happening here, the carnage. He's gone through the Napoleonic Wars. He's never seen a British army break and run like this, okay? So that's the situation as it stands here. How long did it take? Some estimates no more than 45 minutes. That was it. A soldier went from the Jummerville plantation, which was the hospital, on horseback to the front. By the time he got to the front, he ran into the retreating troops. Not quite the same on the West Bank. Jackson's ecstatic. This is amazing. He's got 13 guys down. The British estimates are 761 dead, about another 1,000 wounded. When you're wounded, then you might as well be dead. It's just a slow death. Because the last thing you want to see is a doctor. It's true. Yeah. This is Jackson's report on January 9th. Let's see if I can get around this way. The batteries which had rendered us, he's talking about Patterson's batteries, the most important services, though rarely defended, were of course now abandoned. Not, however, until the guns had been spiked. This unfortunate rout has totally changed the aspect of this. The enemy now occupied a position for which they might, without hazard, and by means of which they might be able to defeat, in great measure, the effects on this side of the river. Jackson thinks all is lost. He's convinced he's lost the city of New Orleans because of the West Bank. So what happens? This is the position here of Thornton. He crosses and he comes all the way up to Beaujolais, which is the very last line of defense. After that, he's here. All he's got to do is shoot cannons and Congreve rockets in the city of New Orleans. What's Jackson going to do? The legislature's meeting here. Some of them wanted to surrender from the beginning. It's like France in World War II. Don't break the glass. You can have it, you know, or destroy the art. Okay? So that was the attitude of some of the elements there. Jackson's here. If he left himself, could he hold this line without his personality being there? Okay? Because these were these people's families and homes on his line. What were they going to do? So this is the problem with the West Bank, and the British are advancing under Thornton. So this was the original plan for Thornton. This is the real plan for Thornton. So as a consequence of this, he's out of this main battle. This is now basically over when this erupts. What happens is, you look at these different lines here. These are different defensive lines that are established. Thornton crosses here. He hits Moran's plantation. The guys there are sleeping, for the most part. They're ill-prepared. They put up a brief skirmish, and then they run. Some run to the back, to the next line. Others disappear into the woods to avoid the fight. Thornton keeps going. What he's done is he's got his boats with carronades on the front, just like they used against the Battle of Lake Borgne, And he's shooting in this direction, his guys are advancing, his naval marines and soldiers. They rally here, he takes them there. Come here, this is curious because this is the line that was established to defend the battery here. And the question was why? You know, it should have been at a narrow point. Latour came down and told him to move it to this line. He insisted, he didn't have enough men to defend the line that long. When the British come, Thornton puts attacks here, but he sends a wave of men around the outskirts to come behind the line. When they get behind the line, the Americans break and run. Patterson sees his end deteriorating. He orders his guns to be switched downstream to kill the British, and his officers tell him, you can't do that, you got Americans there. He says, I don't particularly care, they're running. He says, you can't kill your own men. At which point he spikes his guns, signals to the only other boat Jackson's got to Louisiana to come up. They all escape, his gunners escape to Louisiana, push offshore so they won't be captured. Thornton takes his battery. When he takes his battery, he looks across the river and he sees the chaos that's taking place. But Thornton is an interesting character. He doesn't quit. He keeps advancing. And as he advances, the Americans run. Jackson now sees this. He hears the action on the West Bank, and when he takes his telescope and looks across, he's horrified. What he feared most was the breakdown of militia under an assault by an effectively driven and commanded British force. And that's exactly what's happened. That's why he feels like all is lost. It got to be stopped. They keep advancing until they get here, which is Beaujolais. And this is a better defended line. Latour had built that. It's well reinforced, but by this time, this is done. Thornton's wounded. He works back river, crosses, to talk to Pakenham about getting reinforcements to take this position. When he gets there, he has to talk to Pakenham and inform him he's dead. Oh, well, let me talk to General Gibbs. No, he's dead. What about General Keane? He might as well be dead. What about Renee? He's dead. What about Wilkinson? I don't know where Wilkinson is. Wilkinson's the only guy who actually crossed the American lines and died in American hands. Okay? Only guy left is Lambert. So he says, fine, let me talk to Lambert. He tries to convince Lambert to give me the weapons, the ammunition, the concrete rockets I need. If I punch through this line, I'm here, I got him. Lambert doesn't know what to do. He takes one of his artillery officers named Dickerson, sends him across. The guy comes back and informs him it'll take about 2,000 men and this whole grocery list of things that he needs. We are not privy to the conversation that took place. But I can imagine that Thornton probably looked at us and says, what are you talking about? I did what I did with 600 guys. I got 525 left. I lost 75, killed and wounded, okay? I don't need that much, but even if I did, what the hell? We may have lost 2,000 guys, we still got about 10,000. We got control of the river with the boats. The Navy don't have anything. The only thing they got to Louisiana is got a bunch of guys cowering for fear of getting captured. This is where it stands. All of a sudden, Jackson's concerned and he hears a bugle. He looks down the river, there's 3 soldiers on the Chalmette side, lined up, one with a white flag. So he sends one of his aides-de-camp down. See what they want. The guy comes back, want to talk ceasefire. Lambert. Jackson looks at it, folds it up, hands it, I don't know you damn Lamberts. Sends it back. The note comes back. General of the British Army, Lambert. Damn, we killed all the officers. All right, I'll meet with you. So he meets with him. He says, what do you want? I want a ceasefire. I've got a lot of guys on. Yeah, I noticed that. You had to walk over them to get here. So what's your choice? What's your talk about? I said, well, about 300 yards forward of your line there's a canal. If you don't mind, let the British wounded come across. If you can carry the seriously wounded across, the very seriously wounded, if you don't mind taking them to New Orleans, we'd appreciate it for medical care. So we just like to have a ceasefire. Jackson is a gambler. That's why he's got a bullet in him from a duel. So he looks at Lambert and he says, fine. But it's all on the West Bank. He's losing. It's all on the West Bank. Jackson's probably calculating, if I get a ceasefire here, I can switch some of my guys across to reinforce that line. Lambert looks at him and says, I'll withdraw. You can imagine poker face, instead of being shocked, he just stares him down and sees what you do. And walks off, and probably in the back of his mind says, this guy's a real idiot. You know, because he's got this thing. He's got this. Even the British officers, if you read their accounts, can't believe they're withdrawing. And that's what he does. He withdraws from the West Bank, and Jackson immediately reinforces it, sends troops following them, and when they cross the river to the Riverview Plantation, sets up a battery and starts hammering them at their camp. Because it's all on the West Bank. Okay, no ceasefire there. On the 18th, it's very quiet. And Jackson's curious what's going on. But when he looks, he sees they got British sentries that posted. Frenchman Lombard, who fought with Napoleon, takes out his telescope, looks and tells Jackson, he says, they're gone. What do you mean they're gone? He says, they're gone. He says, here, take this telescope. What do you see? He says, I see a bunch of guys lined up. He says, no, look over their head. What do you see? He says, I see crows. He says, you ever see crows over a guy's head? That's not people. You're kidding. He says, no, go send somebody. The guy goes out. Sure enough, the British have taken the uniforms of dead soldiers, stuffed them with marsh grass, start them up with their rifles, and they've withdrawn. When they go to the British camp, other than the wounded and the doctors that are taking care of the wounded, the British have removed themselves. I think, was it Marty Martin's going to cover that, if I'm not mistaken? You'll get into that whole story, which is an amazing story. They were more afraid of the alligators than anything else. It's an amazing story. That's basically how the Battle of New Orleans and Chapman ends. Now, what finally happens is, the British withdraw. They go to Dolphin Island, and there's some funny stories there. They get to themselves R&R. And then Livingston, who's the attorney and representative of Claiborne and the Americans, meets with Cochrane on his ship off the coast of Mobile, stern to facing Mobile. And in a big wardroom with the curtains closed, they're talking exchange of prisoners. Americans say, well, we want our slaves back, and British say, we don't accept slavery. You're welcome to interview them. If they choose to be slaves again, it's their choice. Otherwise, we're giving them land on our. So this debate's taking place. And then Cochrane says, oh, by the way, you might want to see something. And he opens up the curtains, and just then the American flag comes down on Fort Boyer, and the British flag goes up. So the question is, were they going to go back to the original? What's going to happen now? But we'll never really know what the ultimate plan was, because the boat arrives the next morning, the young officer gets off, hands Cochrane a dispatch that says that the treaty of peace has been signed and ratified, because this is now February, and it's over with. At which point they all gather together, they drink wine, celebrate the end of this unpopular war on all sides, and that marks the end of the War of 1812 and the end of the Battle of New Orleans, and the security of the city of New Orleans in the hands of America and not being turned over to Spain or anyone else. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Yeah, this here was just Cochrane at the 18th attacked the American forts on the river, I think as a distraction while they withdrew themselves. And that's the withdrawal. And that's it. British lost it. That's it. The campaign's end. Ta-da!